place else you'd rather be than right here, right now. When it's too tough for them, it's just right.
Buffalo Recap. Weekly insights for Bills Mafia.
Come to the Buffalo Bills to play in games like this.
It's a great football team with a lot of moral fiber and a lot of character, and they showed it.
Buffalo Recap with John Helmkamp.
What is up, everybody? It is John Helmkamp with the Buffalo Recap. I am joined by the one, the only, Mr. Ryan Talbot. How are you, sir? Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm doing great, and it's great to be on.
Well, thank you. I'm sitting in my freezing cold basement, which is why I have a piping hot cup of tea in the middle of summer. I gotta stay warm down here somehow, and doing my best. We have weather has been nuts from the
crazy.
entire Midwest all the way over to your neck of the woods in New York. I feel like the summer has either been mediocre weather here or absolute insane storm systems, and right now we're in the latter of the two. And I saw stuff where Western New York was getting like 3 feet of like, or three inches an hour of rain piling up in some places on the freeways, and like massive flooding, and Michigan's getting hammered with it too. We're already like 14 tornadoes past our annual average, and it's middle of June. So it's a wacky one. Hopefully the summer calms down a little bit as the Buffalo Bills go through their break period and come back ready to go for training camp, which the dates have officially been announced, July 23rd to August 7th. And then after that, we're into the preseason, and football season is right around the corner, and off we go. So for Bills fans everywhere, you only got like 6 weeks left or so until we're right back into the thick of things with football full time. So we're almost there. We're in the dog days of summer right now, but it's getting close. Mini camp has wrapped. I wanted to get your just kind of general impressions of it, big takeaways, any key storylines that kind of came out of it that you're paying attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, it's tough to gather too much from that just because they're not in pads. Every year there's a few players that look really, really good, and then when the pads come on, they kind of fade away. We saw it last year. Chase Claypool was a guy to kind of keep your eye on in the spring, and then never really panned out there a few years ago before that. Different, and receivers, I guess, is the easiest route to go there. Tavon Austin was looking good without pads on. He was older at that point in his career, but now it's Elijah Moore, and I'm believing that he might be a different case than those receivers that I previously mentioned. He is still a very young receiver in terms of, only been in this league for a few seasons. He's never had good quarterback play. Coming off of back-to-back years, the Browns, 1 year he set a career high in receptions. Another year he set a career high in yards. Now you put him potentially with Josh Allen, and hard for him to carve out maybe a every down type of role in this offense, but I think he could really be someone that comes in when a receiver needs a breather, when they're trying to stretch the field. He's done a lot. He's checked a lot of boxes this spring that makes me think that as long as he can carry it over to a certain extent this summer, it's going to be really hard to knock him off this roster.
I completely agree. I think he's got a really good chance of making it just because this offense does prioritize the positionless wide receiver group so much. They just want guys on the field that can win, that can separate, and that have ability after the catch. I don't think that many people outside of like real sickos that are paying attention to it really closely understand that Elijah Moore has over 100 targets in back-to-back seasons, which is pretty noteworthy. This is not just a fringe roster type production, profile. 100 targets says something. Like, he generates separation. He's making himself a friendly target to the quarterbacks. And like you said, he hasn't had good quarterbacks throwing him the ball. So you give him Josh Allen, and maybe it just makes it something. I'm not banking on him coming out and lighting the world on fire with a 1,000-yard season. We didn't even have a 1,000-yard wide receiver last year, but something along the lines of the production that he's had each of the last 2 seasons, which has been right around 60 receptions, between like 500 to 600 yards receiving, wouldn't really surprise me. I think that's maybe on the high end based on the competition that he has in the room at this point. But with the way that they like getting multiple receivers on the field and the fun alignments that they like and the quick hitters where they like just distributing the ball to these guys, I could easily see him getting into that. Maybe it's closer to like 40 to 50 receptions, not the 50 to 60 side of things. But if you told me that he's a notable contributor in this offense, I would absolutely believe it.
Yeah, and I think the Bills would take the 40 to 50 receptions that, you kind of just laid out based on when they signed him after the draft, the amount of money that they're paying him, knowing how it's the everyone eats type of offense. There's going to be a lot of, footballs to be thrown around, but there's only so many guys that can catch them on a down by down basis. Khalil Shakir is going to have a huge role in this offense. Keon Coleman's going to continue to ascend as long as he's playing like he was pre-wrist injury. I think Dalton Kincaid's in for a big season if he stays healthy. So there's so many guys in this offense already. If you can add someone to the mix, though, to add another 40 receptions and be someone that can maybe give you a few big plays here and there, the Bills would sign up for that all day long.
I think one of my questions about the wide receiver group is the split between Elijah Moore and Curtis Samuel. I think that that's going to be an interesting topic to look for, like which one of them is on the field more, which one is kind of the go-to fourth wide receiver on this team. Which one gets more play? Do they cut into each other too much? Is it kind of an even split where we see them rotating in and out on, certain package situations where they're wanting to put more wide receivers on the field? I'm really curious how that's going to look. Do you have any thoughts on those two wide receivers and how they stack up?
Yeah, well, it comes down to availability first and foremost. And then last year was the early turf toe for Curtis Samuel, and that put him a little bit behind the eight ball in terms of the production, what you saw. So availability is going to be key this summer between both of those players. The more that they can do, as long as they can stay healthy, that's going to determine a lot, in my opinion. And the one thing that helps Samuel is this is his second year now in this system. He's probably a little bit more comfortable at this point in terms of what his responsibilities are, which makes a lot of sense. So that gives him a little bit of a leg up there. But as the season goes on, as long as they both make this roster, I could see them being a 50-50 split in terms of that wide receiver 4 role.
Definitely. You brought up Keon Coleman, and I think that a lot of Bills fans have mixed feelings, or maybe there's even a lot of kind of harsh criticism of him based on his rookie season. Like you said, before that wrist injury, he was playing very well. And now this year, there seems to have been a big focus in the offseason on his physical development, on the working out, the getting bigger, getting stronger. What have you kind of seen and heard that allude to that work that he's putting in, how it's been translating? How much differently is he built than this time last year? I mean, you see some reports that are like, oh, look, in this picture, he looks like a nothing. And in this picture, he looks like Megatron. The truth is somewhere in the middle. He's obviously not Calvin Johnson, but how much has he really put in on that side of things?
Yeah, the picture's going to be so deceiving. And, not throwing anyone under the bus, there's a picture of Kincaid early in the offseason where he was like in motion. It was blurry and in the background and doesn't look like he's added any weight. Well, he has. He's added muscle too. But for Keon Coleman, I don't think he's necessarily his weight any different than it was 1 year ago, but he's turned a lot of his weight from one season ago into muscle, into lean muscle, and he's really putting the work in. I think that there's a few pass catchers on this team that have really dedicated themselves to that role. And we know that what Keon Coleman can do as a blocker. He showed that at times last season. We need to see that physicality, though, the 50-50 balls. That's an area where I think the Bills are banking on him being a little bit better than he was 1 year ago, because he doesn't create the separation that an Elijah Moore does and some of these other receivers. I think going back to what you said about how he's kind of a polarizing figure, he's always going to be compared to Ladd McConkey, someone that was on the board when the Bills made that pick. And it's not fair. Their skill sets are night and day. They're not the same whatsoever. It's what the Bills are looking for versus what, McConkey didn't necessarily check all the boxes for what the Bills were looking for at the time. And I think he's a phenomenal receiver and he would have fit into this offense just fine. But the Bills are looking for a certain skill set, an X receiver. And now he's a young player. He really took it seriously and took it to heart in terms of the weightlifting, getting a little bit more physical. So I think you're going to see that here in year 2.
it's no knock to him, but what you kind of said there is interesting to me, because over this last calendar year, really since the everybody eats mantra, and as last season played out, there has been more of this talk of a positionless wide receiver group. If they kind of knew that that was the direction they were heading, why do you think that they might have been so intent on selecting that X wide receiver prototype? You know what I mean? Like, if you wanted a X, a slot, and a, do everything gadget guy, then why wasn't the offense kind of built that way in terms of the scheme, in terms of the play calling selection? Or was it more of a development of necessity as the season went along that kind of led to that ideology kind of taking place?
I think the latter certainly plays into that a little bit, but it's also where I don't think the Bills knew how well it was going to work going into the season in terms of the positionless wide receiver. They had traded away Stephon Diggs, and Brandon Beans, said at that time, our wide receiver room is not necessarily going to be better than it was 1 year ago, but we have until September. Let's see how it works. And you saw how much better Josh Allen was in terms of protecting the ball and the roles that these different receivers played. It's a shame to see that Mac Hollins left and went elsewhere, but age plays a factor into that. The usage, what you want to see year in, year out, money obviously factored into. The Bills made him an offer, but he was getting offered more in New England at that point in time. So I think going into last season, in their minds, the everyone eats mantra, it sounded good on paper, but until they actually saw the results, you just didn't know if that was necessarily going to work out. Did I lose you? Oh,
you're
there
back.
We go.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries.
You were saying last season going into it, the everybody eats mantra.
Yeah, so pretty much saying, it sounds great on paper, but I don't think any of them would say at that point in time that they knew that that was going to work with that wide receiver group. It worked out well. Josh Allen thrived with that. It made it more, I don't want to say made it more challenging for opposing defenses, because I think if you have a true wide receiver one, that does create its own problems for defenses, but they didn't necessarily know who to zero in on as the year went on. I think you go back to week 1 against Arizona last year, and there were plays where Dalton Kincaid was being like triple covered, because I think a lot of people thought this guy's going to have a huge role in this offense, and the way they were bracketing him in that game. But as the year went on, 1 week it could be Keon Coleman going over 100 yards, and then you knew Khalil Shakir was going to get those quick hitters. But it took time for all that to develop to see what worked best for this team week in and week out.
Do you think that there's any change to that going into this season, or is it basically hey, we're going to run it back? There's some new faces. You have Elijah Moore in tow. Joshua Palmer is someone that I'm really excited about to see how he fits into this team and kind of takes over maybe some of those deep shots, some of the stuff that, Mac Hollins was used on at a pretty good amount. So is it still going to be this kind of similar game plan of everybody eats, and therefore everybody needs to be preparing and ready because their number could be called on any given week? Is that kind of the idea for this offense going into this year?
I believe so. I think that's definitely still the philosophy that they're going to use on offense. Now, that doesn't mean that Josh Palmer's not going to come in here and assume a big role and a week-by-week basis, because Brandon Beane has been beating the drum of this is a guy that we're going to be talking about at the end of the 2025 season as, the Bills paid him, but he really came in and thrived in this role. And it goes back to what we've been talking about with Elijah Moore. Palmer creates separation. It's something that not everyone can do so easily, so naturally. And if you can get yourself available and open, that's going to give you more opportunities in terms of targets in this offense and any offense in this league. So I think Palmer's in for a big role here in his first year in Buffalo, just like Shakir's still going to assume a big role, but you might see a slight dip in targets or receptions when it comes to Shakir, for instance. But the yardage is still going to be in that 800 yard, 700, 800 yard range, in my opinion. Wouldn't shock me if it goes the other way either, honestly, if he went over 1,000, but Palmer's going to have a big role. I've already mentioned Kincaid. It's just if they're winning and they're in that race for the 1 seed, I don't think anyone's going to be complaining.
If Khalil Shakir has 1,000 receiving yards and 890 of them come after the catch, I'm not going to be surprised in the least. Let's pivot to Dalton Kincaid a little bit, because he is another big storyline of this offseason. A lot of criticism on him as well. He's coming into his third year. The knee injury last year wasn't great. But even before that, he and Allen didn't seem to be lockstep. They were missing some plays where the timing just wasn't there. The spatial awareness and where Kincaid was going to be compared to where Allen might have been looking didn't quite sync up on a lot of plays. How important is Kincaid to this offense, and how high are the expectations? This is a guy that traded up in the first round for it. He's entering his third year. Like, this feels like the year where Kincaid has to be like a dude. Like, he has to emerge into being a very good NFL tight end in order to kind of justify that draft pick in a sense, but also when you start talking about contract extensions coming down the line and what the future looks like for him and this team. Is he going to become a guy that is irreplaceable to the point where he's a future piece of this offense? Or is he just a replacement level tight end where they end up moving on from him at the end of his contract?
It's a huge year for him. There's no doubt about that. And what's funny is, last year expectations were so high nationally, based on.
I wrote an article last August about how it would be crazy, but it was doable that both Dalton Kincaid and Khalil Shakir could top 1,000 receiving yards, because I was thinking their share of the offense was going to be so high comparatively. And then the offense went 180 degrees away from that, and everybody eats, and who knows who's going to get the ball. But I was a part of that. Everyone was talking about how no one could guard him in training camp. He was untouchable, and he and Allen were in sync, and he caught 11 of 11 passes in 7-on-7s. Like, it was just feeding him so continuously in the summer, and then to not see that translate to the field was a bit jarring. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, you're fine.
That narrative was so prevalent.
Absolutely. And I was watching it unfold at training camp. And when, fantasy drafts came up, I was grabbing Kincaid as my tight end. And he was going, pretty ridiculously high in some areas based on his production as a rookie, knowing Diggs wasn't going to be in this offense and what that projection was going to look like in terms of the targets he was going to supposedly acquire. Now, 1 year later, after this knee injury, the expectations nationally are low, it feels like, on him. So I think that can be good for him first and foremost. I think you do feel a little bit of that pressure. And I don't think that's the reason why he didn't produce last year. You mentioned it's the knee injury. He couldn't necessarily get open on a consistent basis. He couldn't block it that well. He wasn't a great blocker coming out either, don't get me wrong, but he couldn't probably block the way that he wanted to on certain plays because of the knee injury. And now that he's added some muscle onto his frame, he's still not going to be the best blocker at tight end. He's probably going to be the third best blocker on this team at tight end. Haas is going to be number one.
Don't get me started on Jackson Haas, dude. I love him so much.
I know.
And the pancake highlights are going to be beautiful.
It's going to be crazy. But I think where Knox is now, you could eventually get Kincaid there. Knox has not become like an unbelievable blocker, but he's become a very capable blocker. And that was not his game when he came out years ago. But now it's something he can do. I think it's something that Kincaid can get to. But first and foremost, they're going to look to him to be a big-time pass catcher this year. And with this everyone eats mantra, knowing how it worked, knowing that teams are going to be stressing week in, week out, you don't know who's going to get the ball, that's going to open up some opportunities for Kincaid.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the lower expectation is going to work to his benefit because, like you said, the Arizona Cardinals came out and like triple teamed him in week 1 because the hype was so high on Dalton Kincaid being the team's number 1 option in the passing attack. Like, that's what the narrative was last summer. This year, it's like people are expecting him to be the 5th fiddle in the passing attack. And I think him being the number 1 is more likely than being the number 5 if you were to make me pick which direction I think that he's probably trending. But I think that knee injury was more substantial than a lot of people gave it credit for. And I think that it really impacted a large chunk of the season. Now, to be fair, before the injury, it wasn't all sunshine and roses and stuff like that either. But I just think that there's so much more to Dalton Kincaid's game. And I just can't think that he doesn't hit it. Like, I was so high on him coming out of college, and he had such monster performances. Like his what was it, 240 receiving yard, like 17 reception game against
USC.
Where he just
Monster.
torched them. They couldn't touch him. He just has that upside to be such a potent pass catching weapon. And I just really, I'm hoping for it. I think is more than anything where I'm at. I'm hoping to see him take a step forward in year 3, carve out a significant role and kind of a higher floor on a weekly basis, because we've seen him disappear. And I think that's one thing about this everybody eats thing. Well, it's not always that, because Khalil Shakir never really disappeared. There were a couple weeks where it was lower production, but you kind of knew he was going to get his. And that's where I want Dalton Kincaid to emerge into as well. It's like there shouldn't be a reason why he's not getting 4 to 5 catches in a game. Like, he has that ability, the speed in space, the ability to create separation. Give him a tight end screen, whatever it is, put him in trips and have some wacky formation where you get him matched up on a linebacker and let him win it. Like, there just shouldn't be reasons why Kincaid doesn't have a higher floor in the passing game, with some weeks seeing him be the focal point of the attack, depending on how the defense lines up. And that's the weapon that I want to see Kincaid emerge into this year.
It's funny when you're talking about it. In my mind, I was thinking 4 to 5 catches a week would be more than sufficient for him, where then you have those outliers where it's 8 for 130 or something like that. And it works both ways. There'll be a few weeks where he's not the focal point, or they run the ball a lot, the way that we saw that they love that 3-headed monster that they have there in the backfield. So week by week, the game plan is going to change, but he should be able to command a certain amount of targets week in and week out.
Yeah, give me 4 for 68 and a touchdown on like a weekly basis, and you've got a really good tight end.
Yep.
Let's go to that backfield and let's talk about that. James Cook, obviously, biggest storyline probably of the entire offseason for the Buffalo Bills. We know that Hard Knocks is going to be salivating over it. All of us are going to be breaking down the little sound bites ad nauseum and be like, oh, what did he mean when he said that, and put inflection on that word. It's gonna get ridiculous, I'm sure. But he did show up, and the conversations have been that he's focused on putting in the work. It seems like the expectation is that he's going to be at training camp. We'll see what happens. But I think that seems to be the quote at this point, is that the focus is on preparing for a Super Bowl, and you can't do that if you're not practicing. Something along those lines. What are your kind of takeaways and what you've heard of James Cook as we head towards training camp?
Yeah, 100% has to be there at training camp. Former agent Joel Corey put something out on social media saying that, in Cook's situation, his rookie contract, he has to report to training camp, just like Jonathan Taylor did a few years ago, to get credit for that season. It's not one of those situations where when you're a veteran, you can sit out so many weeks, play X amount of games, and then be credited. He has to be there at training camp. So he'll be there. I thought the big question was, would he show up for mandatory mini camp? And sure enough, he was there. It wasn't a holding situation. He was participating. Would have foregone about $104,000 had he not shown up. And he said, I like my money, which I respect that.
Fair enough.
Where it comes to with the Bills right now, it is, I don't want to say it's a game of chicken. I think the Bills have a value on him, and he and his reps look at what he brings to the table a lot differently. And I can see it from both sides. If I'm the Bills, I can't get myself into that $15 million stratosphere because he's not a 3-down back. He's not a workhorse back. The touchdown production last year was unbelievable, but that's the first year it's happened. Yeah. If I'm Buffalo, I'm sitting there saying, if you can replicate what you did one season ago, then, maybe we can have your closer to that number. But Buffalo, they can't sit there and say, well, we're going to give you $15 million based on one season where you scored 16 on the ground, 2 in the air, where I believe he scored about 2 touchdowns in each of his first 2 seasons, if I remember correctly, where he wasn't a touchdown machine. He was still very productive on the ground, don't get me wrong. But, then if you're James Cook, you're sitting there saying this was one of the best offenses in the league. 1 year ago, I proved what I can do on the ground. I proved that I can get in the end zone in short yardage situations. I can take it to the house from midfield and beyond, and I can still catch the ball pretty well out of the backfield. So he does a lot of things very, very well, but it's also, you have to go back to the percentage on the field, and it's not in that Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, when healthy type of range, those workhorses that are getting the big, big money.
Yeah, this is, I'm going to pull up his stats because I want to see exactly how many carries he had. I know it wasn't a lot. He had last season 207 carries. I did some math breaking down touchdown percentage, like per rush attempt, of some of the top running backs in the league last year. I said it on the show a few weeks ago. I'll just say it again. Saquon Barkley had a touchdown on 3.8% of his rushes. Josh Jacobs, 4.9, Bijan Robinson, 4.6, Kyron Williams, 4.4, Joe Mixon, 4.5, Derrick Henry, 4.9, Jahmyr Gibbs, very robust, 6.4, James Cook, 7.7.
Yeah.
It's an unsustainable percentage. And I wonder if that is what Brandon Beane is looking at, being like, yeah, dude, we love you. We drafted you. You've emerged. You've progressed. You've grown into being a great running back. But expecting you to have a 7.7% touchdown rate per carry is a really high ask. If that comes down to 4%, you're looking at 16 touchdowns going down to like 10,
Right.
which is still a really good year, but it's not leading the NFL in rushing touchdowns, which is where he was last season. So I do wonder, like you said, they're like, hey, we've got our value on you here. Now, if you duplicate it, then we can have a conversation. But if you come down to being a, let's say it's a 1,200 scrimmage yard type season, that's right where he was last year, was 1,200 as well. So let's say that dips a little bit and he's like a little over 1,000 scrimmage yards and 10 total touchdowns. Okay, well, that's like a RB 12 to 15 level production in the NFL, not a top 3 type guy, which is the money that he's seeking. So I think it's in James Cook's court to show up and prove how much he's earned. But I think that's part of the reason why he was pushing for it so hard, is because he knows. It's like, I just put up this monster season. Now give me the money. Okay, well, can you do it year after year? Not many guys can. And especially not at that workload. 207 carries compared to, Derrick Henry's 340 or whatever it was, like astronomically higher. This isn't a bell cow grinded out guy. Now, to his credit, though, he looked really good in short yardage situations, and he played a physical brand of football last season that we have not seen from him. So he did progress and he did grow. But I think the whole conversation comes down to the efficiency. How sustainable is it from going 4 career touchdowns on the ground in the first 2 seasons to 16, and then expecting to stay in that double-digit range each year?
And if you're the Bills, you're sitting there saying, we'd love to have him back. But at the same point, you can only pay so many people, and they've already shelled out a ton of money to a ton of their core players. There's still going to be some more, players on the horizon that they need to consider extending on their offensive line, obviously, at center, if that's the route they want to go. You mentioned Kincaid. That's something here in due time that he could be another guy on that list. So you can't pay everyone. That's the nature of this business. And you look and you see these guys that are getting drafted in the league year in, year out. Round 2, round 3, round 4, and then they come in and they produce. I think Travion Henderson, for example, this year with the Patriots is going to be a guy, just a dude on that offense. It's going to come in and have a big role. You saw what Bucky Irving did last year in Tampa Bay, and the Bills can sit there and say, well, when Ray Davis had to start a week when James Cook was out, he did really well, went over 100 yards, looked the part, had some really nice moments as a rookie. You have that. You bring back Ty Johnson, and if push comes to shove, they can draft a running back in day 2 of the draft next year and not bat an eye in terms of what they feel that running back room by committee could still do if it comes to that.
Because of how loaded on paper this running back draft class was, I really thought there was a chance that we would see Brandon Beane trade James Cook. I thought that possibility existed, and for no other reason than my own imagination. Not anything that Beane had said, not anything like that. But I was just looking at it from my mind going, okay, well, you have this running back that wants to get paid. Brandon Beane doesn't pay running backs. Like, it just doesn't happen with him. And you have a stacked running back class. Like you said, Travion Henderson was a guy that I really thought 3-down workhorse running back, pass catching back with explosiveness that could come in and do the job, along with 5 other guys that were available on day 2. But it didn't happen, and we still have James Cook, and I love James Cook, and it's nothing personal against him, but it's just the business side of the NFL. Getting a running back on a rookie contract is a good way to go about it if that running back produces, just like James Cook is right now, and you have him on the rookie contract. So like you said, next year, potentially, if they just are too far apart, my worst case scenario is we watch him go replace Christian McCaffrey in San Francisco.
Right.
That's the one where I'm just like, oh God, please don't. He'd have so much fun in Kyle Shanahan's system. Like, more power to him. At least he'd be in the NFC. But he would just go destroy in that system. But maybe it is just re-upping day 2 or even like a round 4 running back next season to be a 2-headed backfield with Ray Davis. I don't know. But for this year, I think James Cook is playing. I think he's here. I think, like you said, financially, he's not going to miss it. And it's really puts him in a contract year, puts him essentially in a contract year for him to go out and prove it again that this is sustainable and that he deserves to be paid top dollar in the NFL, which I guess is Brandon Beane dangling the carrot.
100% dangling the carrot. And it's the Bills saying, we're close. We feel like we're close to being that team in the Super Bowl from the AFC, potentially winning the Super Bowl. And we think Cook can be a big part of that, where a rookie, I think Henderson, for instance, is going to come right in and fit in well. But some of these backs do need year 2, year 3 before they really emerge. So why take a step back in that area where this guy is going to be a big focal point on a week-by-week basis in terms of how they utilize him as a pass catcher with the carries, with the ability to kind of break these big runs off at any given time.
Yeah. All right, I want to shift a little bit to the defensive side of the ball. There's some stuff to be discussed there. Mad Max, the first-round draft pick this year, dealing with his injury. What is kind of the status of that? How significant do you think it's going to be for him heading towards training camp?
Doesn't seem overly significant. Brandon Beane believes he'll be ready to go come training camp, the start of training camp. Which is encouraging. Obviously you would have liked to seen him be healthy coming out of the mini camp and things like that, but this is not a long-term, it's not a season ending injury. It's nothing along those lines, where we have seen that across the league already, 1 or 2, where carts had to come out during mini camp or during these mandatory times, and the Bills didn't have any significant injuries take place. So that's the silver lining there. But it will be important for him to stay healthy this summer. The Bills obviously want him to be starting opposite Christian Benford. They were throwing a lot at him at this mandatory mini camp, in my opinion, and I thought he was checking a lot of boxes in terms of how he was responding to it. Sean McDermott has said, I'm not against starting rookies. I'm against starting rookies who aren't ready to play. So by throwing things at him the way they were over the 3-day mandatory mini camp, over the OTAs before that for those 2 weeks, it was encouraging. I think he showed that he had a good knowledge already of the playbook. The athleticism was there. We saw him break up some plays. Maybe he was beaten off the line at times, but he was able to recover because of that athleticism. And the more comfortable he gets, the better he'll be. So that's the good news there. The Bills did bring in some reinforcements in Trey White and Dane Jackson, but I think they're, in their minds, Buffalo would be a lot more comfortable if those are your backups and not someone that you would necessarily have to play if Hairston were to get injured again this summer or something along those lines.
Yeah, by all accounts, it sounded like the practice that he got hurt at was his best one so far, that his speed was starting to show up a little bit more, his confidence was starting to show up a little bit more. So I think watching him throughout training camp is going to be really interesting to see how comfortable he gets and how much he really emerges in understanding, like you're saying, the playbook. The secondary in the Sean McDermott team is not easy to grasp right away. It's a really complicated system. So for him to be able to come in as a rookie and be a week 1 starter would be quite the feat. Like, it would be a big accomplishment, a big nod to him and their faith in him. Same can kind of be said for Cole Bishop, who last year I really think they wanted him to be a week 1 starter
Yeah.
at safety, other than the injuries that he dealt with in training camp. So it seems like they're setting up Harrison in a similar way. I think they're prepping him to have every opportunity to take that role, but he obviously has to earn it on the field. And I think that's how that's leaning. Cole Bishop, super interesting coming into year 2. I thought down the stretch in the playoffs, he started looking pretty good. I thought that he made some good plays. His ability to break on the ball, I thought was good. His physicality at the catch point, I think, stood out a couple times. But there's obviously still a lot of opportunity for growth. I think everyone, unfortunately, the thing that most people are going to remember about his rookie season was Nico Collins blowing by him like a barn door in his first start, which is a rough welcome to the NFL moment, but it happened. What are your thoughts on Bishop and his role? And I guess really we'll just kind of pivot to the safety group as a whole. Jordan Hancock is in this conversation as well, rookie drafted this year at 170th overall. What's kind of your thoughts on the safety group, some of the young guys that have an opportunity to carve out a role compared to kind of the presumed starters?
Yeah. So first and foremost, with Cole Bishop, he looks a lot more comfortable this spring, early summer, whatever you want to call it, in terms of knowing where he's supposed to be and in being a vocal leader. You saw that a little bit, calling things out. That's what you want to see, because again, this was a great athlete when they drafted him, but the comfort level has to be there too. And the injury that he suffered in training camp put him behind the 8 ball. When he's finally healthy, he gets thrown into that Texans game, as you mentioned, and then a costly play, obviously, as you mentioned too, where it went for a touchdown, and those were the deciding points at the end of the day. When you look at the final score, they don't usually give up big plays like that. But now entering year 2, they want to see him win that job, and I would be shocked if he didn't. And injury is the only thing that's going to keep him away from doing that again. I feel like they want Bishop. They want Taylor Rapp. They are very high on Taylor Rapp. I know Rapp also plays a very physical style that puts him at risk of missing time and getting injured. But the Bills love the leadership. They love he brings to the table when he's on the field. So that's what they want as their starting 1-2 punch. But I do like some of the depth that they have there, whether it's people they brought in through free agency. You mentioned Hancock, who has a ton of versatility to his game. The Bills say they have a long-term plan for him. I'm excited to see what that plan looks like.
I think the plan for him might be, let's see where he fits. You said, he's so versatile. He can do so many different things. On that Ohio State defense, he lined up all over the place. And I think he has nickel to box safety to deep field safety flexibility in this defense. Which is really interesting, because maybe the plan for the defense over time is to really disguise coverages a lot and disguise who you have lined up where. And maybe he's lining up almost like a linebacker, and then he's bailing to the deep safety position after the snap. Like, I don't know, but there's so much versatility, and I think that's something that they're really coveting in that secondary with their recent draft selections and kind of the way that it's been looking. Bishop as well has versatility to kind of line up in a variety of different spots. You're really drafting a defense of guys that can mix and match where they line up. And same can be said for the defensive line. All the selections that they've made up front have a lot of versatility as well. You have TJ Sanders, who can line up inside out. You have a bunch of different guys. Deion Walker is going to be someone that's obviously fascinating to see how he handles the transition to the NFL. On the high end, he could be a game wrecker monster of a human being. Obviously, there's a risky floor to his game as well, because of his back injury that he had over time and his pad level, which can be an issue at times if people can get underneath him and completely minimize that disruptive force that he has. But I just think this defense as a whole seems to really just be drafting a lot of athletic players that can play all over the place and then figure out what it looks like from one set of plays to the next. It's a really interesting approach that they seem to have on defense.
Yeah, the relative athletic score year in, year out, it feels like with their 30 visits and the players they look at on both sides of the ball, it feels like something that they really do covet and they look at. Because, saw a great interview or a little segment or clip on social media recently with Cooper Kupp. And he was talking about that first year in that Rams offense with McVay and how it was just like unfair to defenses. And they would be laughing about what defenses were showing pre-snap and how they had no idea what was going to happen. And then the second year, defenses started to adjust. And by year 3, they weren't showing the defenses, that is, what they were doing pre-snap, and they were taking things away. So it's this fun battle between offenses and defenses in this league. And when you look at what the Bills are doing, they're looking for those versatile pieces. And you mentioned a few already, and Derek Forrest isn't necessarily in that same boat, but I like his skill set and what he brings from Washington. Played really well in 2022, suffered an injury in 2023. Last year was kind of buried on that depth chart with a new coaching regime, but I like what he brings. And Sanders was making some nice plays already for the Bills. I really do like his upside on this defensive line. Deion Walker was 100% worth the gamble based on where the Bills landed him. You mentioned the pad level playing up too high. I think it's like anything else. It's like, oh, you can't teach Josh Allen accuracy. Well, yeah, you can actually. You can teach a guy to play a little bit lower, and I think he was playing up higher because of the back injury. If he can stay healthy, there's all these little things where a guy that size shouldn't move the way that he moves. And if they can just kind of tinker his game a little bit, he can be very scary. So, the more that you bring to the table, the more that you can do, it certainly helps you in this scheme.
Yeah, completely agree. He's going to be fascinating. I remember in the pre-draft process, a year ago, people were looking at Deion Walker as a future first rounder. Yeah. And then as the pre-draft process started ramping up, his stock just continuously fell. And he went from being, maybe this is someone that should be in the conversation at 30 to, maybe not at 30, but round 2 is interesting. And then they get him where they got him in the 4th. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, you're using a day 3 pick on someone with potential round 1 upside. And that's all that you're looking for. Is it's worth the gamble there at round 4. This is a player that, as a true freshman in the SEC, was wrecking SEC offensive linemen, lining up from nose tackle to edge. Kentucky put him everywhere. And he was hitting spin moves and swims and rips and all kinds of stuff as like an 18-year-old, 340-pound, 6'7" defensive lineman. And you're like, what is that guy doing? That's insane. Big guys shouldn't be able to do what he does. So having that like nugget of potential in there for Deion Walker makes him so intriguing to me. You're not counting on him to be a starter by any means, but this is a guy that hopefully you can coach up the pad level, like you're saying. Hopefully he's fully recovered from that back injury. And maybe he's just a rotational defensive tackle, 3 tech. Maybe they put him at 1 a little bit here and there and just get him onto the field and get him acclimated and see what they have over time. But there's so many of those guys on this defensive front where it's almost like they kind of took the Eagles playbook a little bit. You can never have too many guys on the defensive line.
Right.
And it's like, we don't need a 3 tech. We have Ed Oliver. You always need a 3 tech. Like, I'm sorry. Yep. You always need a 3 tech. You always need a 1 tech. You always need edge. You can't have too many of them because in today's NFL, you want to be rotating lines like it's hockey. You want to be just turning guys out there constantly. Yeah, you want your core guys on the field when it matters and getting a bulk of the snaps, but continuously making substitutions and keeping people fresh and playing to the situation and be like, I want these 4 guys right now because it's 3rd and long. And maybe that means that you go with, a race car package up front of just big edge rushers. And you've got Landon Jackson out there and you have TJ Sanders and you have Greg Rousseau and you have all these like bigger guys where maybe Landon Jackson kicks inside or you put TJ Sanders over the edge or whatever. I don't know. Just get creative with it. You can't have too many guys on the defensive line. And I love the way that they attacked that in this draft. I know the draft was like almost 3 months ago now, but I still I love it. And I'm very curious when we start getting into training camp, when we start getting into preseason games, even the joint practice, which has been announced that they're going to have a joint practice with the Chicago Bears before that preseason week 2 game. Very curious to see what the different alignments look like and who's getting on the field where, because I know that there's so much possibility for how they deploy these guys.
And that's going to be a fun, battle to watch at the joint practice. Even in a preseason game where things are usually pretty vanilla, Chicago invested a lot in their O-line this summer, and rightfully so when you have a young quarterback and a lot of young weapons. So it'll be fun to see how the Bills, counter that and try to win some battles at that joint practice. But you're right. I mean, it was a year ago that they drafted Dwayne Carter, and you thought he was going to have a big role, and injuries factored into it. That wrist injury really hampered him. Looking at what they think he could be in year 2, they didn't shy away from adding more defensive tackles into this room and adding more guys in free agency. Obviously, the new Ogunjobi was going to be dealing with a suspension at the time of the draft. But even going that route, adding some veterans in and off the edge, Landon Jackson, I loved his value as well in round 3. Some of that in some mock drafts, he was going late in round 1, early round 2. The Bills, obviously, in an ideal world, they would love it to be Bosa and Rousseau playing in those meaningful snaps and reps. But injuries happen. We know that's certainly the case with Bosa, especially. So if you can get Landon Jackson in there and give him some meaningful reps as a rookie, that's going to help his development. They just have so many guys. Hoyt will eventually come back from that suspension. There's another guy that has a lot of versatility. You mentioned a guy that you could kick inside on third and obvious passing downs. He has the ability to do that. Javon Solomon's a player that, with a small sample size as a rookie, I was really impressed with him. So
you almost forget about Javon Solomon.
You almost
there's
do.
So many guys in the room now, but smaller edge rusher, but uber productive in college.
Right.
With that speed rush in particular. Another guy that's in the rotation that might not get a whole lot of snaps, but we're talking about obvious passing down situations. I like him on the field.
Yeah.
Give me some opportunities for him to be out there to just go win against the tackle where that it's like, hey, you're aiming for 7 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Like that's where you're getting to at that point, because this is going to be a deep drop, obvious passing down situation, and let him go get it. And yeah, just another guy.
Just tons of depth. And like you said, it's the Eagles playbook. I thought he flashed at times late last season, that being Solomon. So it's going to be intriguing. This feels like the deepest D line that they've had in some time.
Yeah, I agree. Talking about pass rush is always fun because everyone loves it, and we need to be better at it. I'm not a member of the Bills. The Buffalo Bills need to be better at it. Run defense too. Run defense is a big thing that needs to adjust. There were multiple times last year where it just felt like the front was getting blown off the ball, and like they couldn't handle double teams, and they couldn't, teams that would run duo against them would just punish them up front on multiple situations. Now they stood tall, especially in the playoffs against the Ravens. That was a massive character check type performance from that defense, and it was great to see that. But I feel like the run defense might be the most improved element of this defensive unit heading into this year, based on health at the linebacker positions. And now all of these guys that they put into the defensive front are all strong against the run as well. Joey Bosa in particular, if he's on the field, you have an edge that can play the run incredibly well. Not to besmirch Von Miller's name, but run defense is not his game. No. He was a speed rusher, always was. Joey Bosa is a big, powerful, long-armed edge that can set an edge really, really well. So if he's on the field, I like the defense a lot better in run defense for setting edges. I like Landon Jackson's long reach and strength on the edge as well, for the same reason, to be able to help really solidify that run defense. And all the other guys that they added in free agency and through the draft are all great additions to run stuffing and just blowing up stuff on the middle, or absorbing double teams and allowing the linebackers to flow.
Yeah. And the linebackers, in terms of the flow, that's a great, point. There's a whole story last year on Ed Oliver that my coworker Matt Perino wrote, the production, the numbers weren't the same as the year before that. But Oliver was still being disruptive. It's just the linebackers came in, and Terrell Bernard said, well, some of the lack of stats that falls on us and not getting to where we need to be, and not making it so he's taking on these double teams all the time. So there was, responsibility in terms of why maybe his stats overall weren't quite the same from 2 years ago as they were last year. But what he brings to the table, and the athleticism that they have at the linebacker position, with Bernard, with even Milano at this point in his game, and then obviously Dorian Williams. It was a position that I was a little bit worried about post-draft because they didn't really address it, but Joey Andreessen had a really good spring / early summer. I'm feeling better about the position just based on how he's looked. I think Ulofoshio, they have a bigger role in mind. You bring in a Shaq Thompson, that's very similar to like the Deion Jones move a year ago, where let's bring in this veteran and see how he fits and how he does. Thompson, obviously, though, has ties to Sean McDermott in the defense. That gives him a little bit more of an advantage. But the linebacker play, I feel like that's going to help this year with the run defense. That you mentioned Bosa, Landon Jackson, some of these young disruptors on the interior with Sanders, especially coming to mind. If you don't have if you're giving Ed Oliver a breather, I think he can come in and possibly do the job. What does Daquan Jones look like at this point in his career? You're hoping there's still some of that flashes, but at the end of the day, the Bills would love to make opposing offenses one-dimensional. And if the offense is doing their job like it was 1 year ago, that certainly helps too in terms of the run defense, because teams won't be running the ball as much.
Yeah, completely agree. I think watching just the defense as a whole this year is going to be really fascinating. Along with the offense, can they keep up the same level of efficiency? They're one of the most efficient offenses in the NFL last year, if not
Right.
the. Can that maintain? And I think there's every reason to think that it can, and it should. You should have Joe Brady continuing to develop as an offensive coordinator. You should have all the players having more familiarity with that scheme and his language and his play calling and all of that. You return all of your key players. You return the entire offensive line, including all six offensive linemen,
Right.
not just the first five. James Cook is back. Your top two tight ends are back. You have Keon Coleman. You have Dalton Kincaid. You have Dawson Knox. You have Khalil Shakir. Everybody's back. Like the gang's all back together. And then you added some pieces in. So it's going to be really fun to watch just how this team goes about it. The week 1 matchup against Baltimore certainly got a little bit more interesting with Jair Alexander joining the Ravens. What are your thoughts on that addition? Along with Lamar Jackson's comments about wanting revenge or
Vengeance.
redemption?
Yeah, vengeance on their minds.
Pick your descriptor.
So, Jair Alexander comes down to his health. When healthy, still a very, very good cornerback, but there's a reason why Green Bay moved on from him. There's a reason he signed a 1-year deal with a lot of incentives. He has to prove that he can stay healthy, but if he does, that's an unbelievable secondary on paper. When you look at the cornerback depth and you look at the safety names, obviously, Kyle Hamilton's one of the best in the business. They add Starks to that unit, always finding these great fits and great values in the draft.
Them getting Starks pissed me off.
I
not happy about that.
It's just they always seem to have that one guy fall into the lap on the defensive side of the ball where you say, oh, man, that's the last team I'd like to see him land with just because of how well he fits on paper. So it looks good for them on paper, but we've also seen a lot of teams on paper not materialize the way that you would expect. And, how does this defense respond with some new players, some new pieces, coaching, etc. That will be interesting and fun to watch. And then, Lamar Jackson says he has revenge on his mind. Raquan Smith said something a few months ago, too, about getting a little bit of payback. So they certainly had that game circled before they knew what week it was going to be played. But a win or a loss, it doesn't matter in terms of how the previous season ended. So this doesn't, no matter the outcome, it doesn't make up for how they performed in those meaningful playoff games, which just kind of always come back to bite Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, where in those big games, they're just not showing up. But yeah, they certainly are going to want to come into Buffalo and spoil that week 1 Sunday Night Football game. But the Bills are going to come back with some counter punches of their own.
Week 1 is always so weird too. So I'm really curious to see what these teams look like. Is it a, tightly contested, hard fought game like you would expect out of these two, honestly Super Bowl contender teams? Or is it just going to be week 1 weirdness? The quarterbacks aren't sharp. The wide receivers aren't running the right routes. Like, I don't know. It's just, you never know what you're going to get in week 1. And if you told me that Buffalo won by 3 touchdowns or Baltimore won by 3 touchdowns, neither option would surprise me all that much, just based on how weird week 1 can be.
Absolutely. The oddities of it, the rust that teams are still shaking off, because even with the preseason, a lot of these star players aren't playing many meaningful reps. They get the chemistry, they work on their chemistry at training camp a little bit, but it's not the same as in a real game situation. The one thing that certainly works to Baltimore's favor a little bit is you are getting an uber fresh Derrick Henry in week 1, where if the Bills would have been matched up against them in week 14, week 15, I'd be like, well, he's already taken some hits and some punishment this year, might not be running at the same type of clip. So that's one thing that they're probably pretty grateful for.
Yeah, 28 carries and 4 catches incoming for Derrick Henry in week 1. I think that about covers everything that I had on my list. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. Tell the people what's up, where they can find you, and what you're doing.
Yeah, you can find me on pretty much all social media platforms at Ryan Talbot Bills. You can find my work at Syracuse.com and NYUp.com. And you can find the Shout Buffalo Football podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms. And we also stream live using StreamYard on X, Facebook, and YouTube.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And until next time, go Bills.